If you're raised as a Christian and you've ever wanted to know the truth about the New Testament, here it is right now.
Okay, so my name's Jason Hayward. I live in Australia. I've studied the New Testament, modern history, ancient history, and after 20 years of research, I've got some answers to questions that many Christians may want to know. This is for anyone that just wanted to know the truth. I wrote a book about the New Testament. It has two editions. One, the devotional edition, which is the New Testament, the absolute truth. But later I realized, because there's many layers in the New Testament, I created a book called The Foundational Codes of Governance. And this is the architectural edition. So these episodes will be me going through what I learned, and I'll be teaching. My aim is to educate people, to free them from things like Sunday school philosophies, which didn't really cover the New Testament for what it actually is. So we'll be proceeding very quickly. I'll be trying to cover a lot of ground. I'll go through the chapters one by one, and I'll explain what the New Testament is in an adult, intelligent manner. And I'll try to provide you with the absolute truth. I hope you enjoy these episodes. I've enjoyed putting them together. There is a massive amount of information. If you jump to conclusions before you get all the information, you won't understand. I have to explain to you that the New Testament is actually the inner workings of the government. This story goes back 5,000 years to ancient Hebrew. The original story was Nagid. Nagid was a man elected by the people to represent as government. About 1000 BC, Greece and Rome formed a new understanding and a split from the church, and they went into a supernatural direction, which then became the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of God, as you would probably know. So I'll just jump in and I'll just go for it. I'll be just saying things. Let's get started. Chapter 1, the foundation of the code. Okay, so the main character in the New Testament is Jesus. That is the framework for the major narrative arcs to show how flesh and bone story decodes into a manual for the separation of powers in the beautification of the Roman Empire. Straight up, Jesus is an acronym. It stands for Justice, Executive, Senate, under Star. And it was the new system of government. Now, I can go on about stories about how the Jewish people left and they wanted not to worship or have celestial gods, which they just left from the Egyptian Empire. They created their own. They wanted a terrestrial version. They made a progressive terrestrial tool. It was the three arms of the government and the separation of powers: justice, executive, senate. In many countries in the world today, Earth, we do have that system running right now. Throughout history, there were many discussions. One of them was, a man says, "How would you know if I was telling you the truth?" The other man says, "Because I'd be with God." And the other man says, "How would you prove that?" And along come this book. Originally, this book was called the Apostle and the Chronicles, but the way it's coded and text in the form, the Chronicles is reference. Later, it was called the Testament. Now it's called the New Testament. But if you break the words down, it's actually the New Test. Amen. Cross. And amen can only be said verily or if it is true. You cannot keep saying something back to a person who says amen. If it is not the truth, you cannot say amen. It is a test. This entire book is a test. All you ever had to do was read the book, be honest about your feelings when you read, and the light will guide you through to pass the test. But people are not honest to themselves. People do not even know who they are. Have you ever heard the term know thyself? Because it's extremely important. If you want to walk with God, you have to know yourself. You have to know your feelings when you read. If you were honest, you would have worked it out. A lot of people get bogged down with Sunday school philosophies. It's not the truth. They're kid stories. You need the adult, intelligent story. Because of what's happened in the world, there's been many problems now. Western decay, Western rot, the drift of Western civilizations, and even religion. In fact, from what I understand and the people I've spoken to, I have studied for 20 years. I have more studies than most of the people who actually work in the churches and religions. As I said, my name's Jason Hayward and I live in Wollongong. And I'll probably keep these down to 5-minute episodes just to make sure that when I upload them, they upload. So let's continue. We started by explaining that Jesus is an acronym, and it stands for Justice, Executive, Senate, under STAR. It might sound a bit silly. Why would they want to make it under STAR? Well, they don't want, because the Jewish people made this government style type and they did not want celestial gods, so they moved in and just made it under the star. They wanted a terrestrial tool and they created Jesus. So, straight up, Jesus is an acronym. It stands for Justice, Executive, Senate, under STAR, and it was the new system of government that was being implemented in the time frame, replacing the old system. In this episode, the gospel isn't a biology, it's a state law cipher, documenting the transition from the pure type of tripartite system into a centralized, collusive Roman model. The nativity, the birth of the system. The birth of Christ is the formal codification of Jesus, acronym, interstate law. The 3 wise men. These represent the 3 arms of the government, Justice, Executive, Senate, coming together to recognize a new unified legal standard. The Star of Bethlehem. In this framework, the S stands for star, the guiding administrative light or high command that sits above the 3 branches. The Herald's degree. This represents the old monarchical system attempting to kill the separation of powers before it can be implemented as a tripartite system. Limits a king's absolute power, Jesus, new government system. Now, as I was going through the 20 years, I clearly recognized many acronyms. And some of those acronyms, when I first worked them out, helped me work out what was really going on. One of them was spear, because when Jesus was crucified, he was also stabbed by a spear. But when they say Jesus was crucified, they will say he was crucified on the cross. Now, spear is an acronym. It means Star, Praetorian, Empire, Alliance, Royal, which means whoever the spear person was probably something to do with Star, Praetorian, Empire, Alliance, or a Royal. Star is just someone who worshipped celestial gods and later become the fall guy for Jesus, the terrestrial progressive tool. Cross is an acronym. Centurion, Royal Order. Star State. Centurion Royal Order is a bill. There's only ever one. And Star State is saying that this is a star state. So the cross as a location was a star state, not a territory, which means Jesus wasn't a prophet. Jesus can be the Son of God because it's state law. In truth, the great resurrection was the passing in of the bill for Jesus, and it got passed out, which means it did not pass. That's your April, that's your great resurrection. But later, the bill was picked back up by government and reinitiated into the House of Government. And it was passed, as you would know, December 25th, which does show you that those governments actually worked the full year. The Ministry of Mechanics of Governance. The miracles are legal precedents or administrative fixes for a failing state. Turning water into wine. This decodes as the transformation of raw public resources, water, into taxable refined state assets, wine, through a legislative miracle. That means that all this is the return of investment. It is showing you that a government can invest in things and it can get a return. It's not an actual physical act. I know a lot of people have been told as kids that it takes faith to believe in Christianity, and I know that can become a bit of a jail. But in all honesty, the story about Jesus turning water into wine is just ROI, return of investment. It's just saying if you invest in something, you can get a return. If you invest in a seed, you can get back a crop. That's what it is. This is the entire New Testament is an intelligible inner workings of the government and was supposed to be understood by intelligent people who were educated and could articulate, because much of this information was needed to maintain a stable government. The government itself must be held accountable, but the drifters allowed for people to wander off and not care and just believe the Sunday school stories. The next act contained within, healing the blind. This is an act of making the law visible to the public. It represents transparency in justice. Healing the blind is the government's day-to-day being accountable and transparent to the people. It is not a physical act where Jesus walked around healing people so they could see. Chapter 2. Systemic logic versus traditional narrative. Feeding the 5,000. This is a lesson in logistics and supply chain. It demonstrates how a small amount of Senate-approved budget, the loaves and fishes, can be stretched across a vast population through efficient distribution. The 12 baskets left over represent the 12 administrative districts. The apostles, the administrative departments, the 12 apostles themselves, or Jesus' disciples, they were not real people. None of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, none of them are real. They're actually territorial governments for the most part, which is they're like territories around this new establishing Jesus. So, for instance, the acronyms are all throughout. So Matthew, Metal, Alliance, Territory, Hathor, Empire, Mountain, which basically means there were two territories side by side. One was a metal alliance and the other seemed to be women who were growing on the mountain. And as you go through, you can actually see every disciple, what they really were as a geopolitical government style. Matthew, Mark, Metal, Alliance, Royal, Knight. That's the way they run their territory. Luke, Legion under Knight Empire. John, Justice, Order, Hathor, Nature. Hathor can normally be just women. It can also be farmers. But when Jesus says, come unto me for I am the way, Jesus is just saying, I'm a better system of government. I am. Like, he doesn't say I am the three arms of the government and the separation of powers. He just says, I am the way, which is suggesting that the Jesus system is a more efficient and more effective system than just randomly having these types of systems that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had. Peter is an acronym. It stands for Praetorian Empire, Territory, Empire of Rome. And Peter is the rock. He represents the judiciary, justice. He is the foundation upon which the church, the legal church, the court is built. Judas, he represents justice under dynasty, alliance, star. And as I said earlier, Star eventually becomes the bad guy because the Jewish people created Jesus to be a terrestrial system. They need a fall guy. They pick on the star, which is basically they're picking on any celestial god or anything associated with the star because they see that as just a weakness. When the Jewish people left, they got sick and tired of worshipping gods who were celestial because they said it did nothing for their lives. So the Jewish people wanted to invent a system. They created the free arms of the government. They said that was a dynamic which they could invest in, and that could be part of their progressive civilization in a positive manner. When the Romans got hold of that, they invested both in a spirituality of the religion and the dynamics of the government, which created a two system. Whereas when Jesus said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but give unto God which is God, they created a dual system as a philosophy. So the entire New Testament really is just a system. It's basically a handbook for how to run an efficient government.
Okay, that concludes episode 1, and we'll be back later with episode 2.